So a lot of what we've been talking about is about how maybe expertise is a little bit can undermine democratic legitimacy. And actually what I want to discuss is the other perspective on that, is that at least for health, expertise is actually core to the kind of debates that need to be had in order to come to good health policy. And so what this paper is really about is about the role of the EU for that particular type of debates that are being held in the health law and policy. Let's see. No, sorry. I just pushed that button, but nothing happened. That one. So, when did health ever become political in the EU? I guess the one moment that we can all remember is the time around the Bolkestein Directive and everything that happened after that, when health was included in the Services Directive, and then at some point, because it became too politically debated, had to be taken out again. And one of the national civil servants at the time told me, they said, the more they can gain control on how to do things, they meaning the EU institutions, the more they can show that Europe is achieving something, and that is their objective. But member states have long traditions of doing things slightly differently, and they want to keep that in areas where there's no full competence in the treaties. And of course, that's the case with health. There is no full competence in the treaties. So this also brings back this long-standing debacle of a treaty change in the field of health back on the table. Because as we've all seen, the COVID-19 crisis really did reveal some weaknesses in the way that the EU was able to coordinate response. We've had this whole debate around the creation of a European Health Union. And in 2021, Merkel even said, we do not rule out a treaty change. Now, I think it's off the table at this point, but the question is, what is, okay, yeah. And then of course, there's vast differences in the quality and the safety of health across European systems. So there's a reason that the EU doesn't have a strong legal competence in this field, because there's such vast redistributive differences in the way that health systems are organized, organizational differences, but also the underlying values and principles that you will find in the field of health culture are very different. So there is a sort of understandable reason to be a little bit careful with having the EU be like the elephant through the porcelain cabinet or some kind of expression in this regard. It's a sensitive field of lawmaking. So what role does the EU have for ensuring political contestation in the field of health, right? What impact maybe does the EU have for ensuring political contestation in health? And what does expertise have to do with that? So I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by political contestation. Then I'll talk about what the current EU legislative basis in health is doing for political contestation, procedural implications, substantive implications, and what difference would law be able to make for political contestation in health law and policy. And I'm going to be addressing expertise throughout. So as far as the literature goes, and I'm just going to summarize it very quickly, political contestation in the political or the lawmaking process is about critical engagement with norms. And we find political contestation in many different areas, but it is about people being able to say, I don't like this law, I don't like this policy, let's discuss it, right? It's about being able to talk back, basically. Now, the EU, of course, has this system of conferred lawmaking power. I don't have to go over this with you because you all know this. And only in specific fields the EU has power. And this is important, the specific, the way that the EU the treaties have created the legal competences. For health, it's very limited. So the EU has this very limited lawmaking power. There's some mainstreaming of health concerns. So in all kinds of lawmaking, health needs to be mainstreamed. Generally, harmonization of national laws is prohibited. In two areas, actually, there's two paragraphs in the health basis where this is reiterated. You're like, okay, the member states really did not want the EU to have a general lawmaking power in this field because it keeps repeating itself throughout the treaty, except in some vast areas of health lawmaking, which is medicines, blood, veterinary health, plant health, and on incentive measures for cross-border health. There is actually the ability to create harmonized measures. But has this competence actually limited the power of lawmaking in the field of health? Not at all, right? So we see across very important aspects of the creation of health systems, but also the markets in the field of health, also in the field of public health, we see EU law, right? It just doesn't come in through the legal basis, but clearly the EU is not limited in its lawmaking abilities when it comes to health by its limited legislative basis. We also see a lot of soft law guidelines, recommendations, and the use of other legal bases, the internal market, agriculture, free movement of workers, even in areas where there's redistribution going on. So it's not just about the regulatory state and making regulations, also in areas where there's redistribution, much less so, right, where it affects the welfare state and solidarity. Still also in those areas, you will see the EU playing an important role. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because in these softer modes of governance, there's a more unclear democratic process. And also because the conferred powers are issue specific, so I'll get to that later on. But then it comes to expertise. It matters for the involvement of the professional community, the way that the law is created or the way that the EU constitutional system is disenfranchising actually expertise in the field of health. So this is where I come to this other perspective on how expertise might play a role. So first, the procedural implications. Now, when I do this, where there's mostly health policy people, we can look at ourselves, right? We are a professional community. We are also a professional community, by the way, as lawyers, lawyers working mostly on EU law, we create a professional community. And what does that mean? And how does that matter for health? Well, a professional community matters, like it creates a bounded rationality. So it matters where you're coming from and also in how much impact you can have. If you want people to listen to you and you're part of a professional community, you need to be able to speak truth to power, right? You need to have a diploma, especially in the field of health. If you're not an epidemiologist and you're talking about, well, anyway, impact on health of various variables, then people might not trust you very much. So the kind of expertise that you're bringing to the table in the lawmaking process matters. What you will also see is that what is then created if you have a professional community that follows a portfolio logic. So even if people are coming from left and right, when you're all working on a particular type of policy, you'll create these shared values and rationalities. In the field of health, when you talk about human dignity, everybody knows what you're talking about, specifically for health, right? There's these shared values that you feel are more important for this specific field. I'm sure you have the same in the environment. You know what you're talking about. You know when people know where you're coming from. So there is a sociology that takes place. And even in the 70s already, this phenomenon has been researched, and it says that around particular policy areas, it creates a proto-administration. So what that means is that people move in and out of government. People are either involved in civil society around a particular issue, but then they work in the government. So if you do research on people's resumes, their CVs, People will work inside, outside of government. They all know each other. It's a network. They probably know each other from their studies already. So this creates a kind of proto-administration around a particular policy areas. And specifically in health, this is a very strong phenomenon. What are some of these shared values of these professional communities? Human dignity, solidarity, equality, and equity. These are super important values because of the vulnerabilities of the people that are sick, people that become patients. So there's all kinds of sort of shared values that are important in this professional community that everybody recognizes. Now, usually when EU law is made, I feel like I don't have to explain this to you, but you go through the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament, and these are all representing particular democratic fora. Now, what happens because of the limited EU power here, it disconnects the national and the EU processes in health. So at the national level, you will see that these professional communities move around the health department. And so that it means that when the health department wants to propose a law, they will engage with the know-how of the professional community around it. In the EU, because other legal competences need to be used, this also means in the process of lawmaking, other professional communities are being engaged. So it's not when it's in the internal market, enterprise, agriculture, that involves different national representations and a different policy expertise that really probably doesn't know much about health. And this is also some of the disconnect that we saw with the Services Directive. These were economists making health policy, and the health community was like, what the hell is going on here? Why is internal market coming up with a harmonization rule that deals with something so sensitive? You have no idea what you're talking about. So that's what might happen if other professional communities are involved in the lawmaking process on something that's quite sensitive. And I think to some extent, this also explains the defensive nature of the way that the competence of health is being built up. Because only when there's a treaty change, the health ministers are actually become more involved. And all they've said every time there was a treaty change is, yeah, okay, we're doing this already. Maybe let's legislate on it, right? Maybe let's create a very small competence on medicines. But other than that, let's just not do this. Let's do less of this. Why do you see so much defensiveness in these constitutional moments? Because so much was already going on, coming in from an area where the professional communities were like, this is really not the way we do health policy making at the national level. So it has some substantive implications. The limited legal basis affects a substantive political discussion on the need of an EU intervention based on the way that the health professional community would talk about this, health values, principle, improving public health, thinking about equity, equality in the field of health, thinking about the kinds of solidarity measures when you have access to health for this, maybe, so what is in the basket of care, all kinds of very specific, policy-specific considerations that might not be able to come into the political discussion. And it especially comes in when we're talking about subsidiarity then, because when you're talking subsidiarity, there's no more political discussion in the EU, I would say, than the issue of subsidiarity, right? You can talk left and right, you can give all kinds of arguments as to why the EU would do something better than nation states, but it's all about a political will in the end to have the EU play a role in a specific area. And if in that discussion, the question is not, doesn't come on the table, whether or not these very difficult moral decisions that have been made on how to organize rationing at a national level of who gets access to what kind of health, if that discussion is not even on the table, it's in the question of subsidiarity, it's gonna, in the end, affect the way that the quality of the kinds of the lawmaking and the actual quality of the contestation on an issue. on something that I think we all care quite deeply about. So this is saying the same point that I just made. So the assessment on whether legislation is useful for reasons of health, human health, is different when health is ancillary to other policy objectives. So what difference would then a stronger EU legal basis make? What difference would law make for health politics here? Well, I think it would, if the normal legislative procedure would apply, that would mean probably there's no rule, but it would be probable that there would be an actual health configuration for a council configuration for health, so that the health ministers would have a stronger representation in the EU. I think you would have a stronger role for the Commission to initiate legislation because they have a stronger competence. Also, I think, and that's most important, I think, it would engage the national parliaments in the council and the national parliaments and the council, health departments. And that means connecting the expertise of the health community. And I think that would be important for the depth and the quality of the conversation and the actual political contestation in the field of health. It would mean a stronger overall political representation nationally and in the EU, and health departments and the related professional communities at national level can no longer be circumvented by the EU, by basically the other departments, because the EU is nothing but the member states. So when a health law is being made on the internal market, it's just their colleagues in the other ministry, right? So I think that's for the subsidiarity, it would leave more room for health value-based kind of decision. And so that brings the end of this to kind of the paradox, is that where we would see more EU power in health, it might mean that we would see less EU health law, because it might mean that member states would say, well, actually the EU is not really the best place to legislate in this particular area.
Thank you very much.